Good morning, everyone. We're just about to start the next session, so everyone take a seat. And so introduce our next speaker. It's Jane O'Loughlin from CERT New Zealand, and Jane's going to talk about what they do in the shadows and why they need to come out and engage everyday people on cybersecurity. Please welcome Jane.
Thanks everybody, great to be here today, and thanks very much to the organisers of AusCERT for taking a chance and allowing a New Zealander to be on the program. So hopefully I'll add a little bit to the sum of human knowledge, but it's been really fantastic to be here this week and hear so much about what Australia's going through in terms of cybersecurity threats and also innovations. So there's a lot that I'll be taking back to CERT New Zealand when I head back to Wellington later on this week. But what I want to talk to you today about is what we do in the shadows and why we need to come out of the shadows to engage people on cybersecurity. So some of you may know that I've nicked the title of this talk from this movie, What We Do in the Shadows, which is one that's set in Wellington actually, about a bunch of vampires who are flatting together in Wellington and what they get up to, starring Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi. Has anyone seen it? A few people there. It's been turned into a TV program as well. But I thought it was apt because it has a bit of a retro theme and it also fits in with my idea of my interest in why cybersecurity is so shadowy. And I did think that for those of you who had a big night last night, you might feel like the undead today, so that also may work as well. So I'll make a few gratuitous links to the movie as we go through the presentation, just to sort of add a bit of levity. And it's got a computer guy in it as well, an IT guy, who incidentally was not an actor and was just called in to be the IT support for the movie, but ended up being actually in the movie as well. So CERT New Zealand is where I work, and just to explain a little bit about how we are structured, a little bit different from AusCERT, and some of you have just heard the really interesting back history of AusCERT, going back 30 years, of course. So we're relatively late to the party. CERT New Zealand's only 6 years old, and we are pretty much a government agency, so we sit within the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. So we're focused on businesses and individuals and consumers, helping those people out, and fully funded by government. And we have 3 main areas of delivery: incident response, insights and intelligence, where we take the information we get through our reports, as well as information from a whole bunch of sources, package it up to help people understand what's going on. And the area that I'm working in, engagement, communications and partnerships, which is obviously the marketing and communications sort of area, and also working through our partners to get information out and also to glean information and bring it back. So some of you will be thinking, well, I'm not a comms person. How is this useful for me? What's in it for me? When I say me, I mean you. I guess a common theme that's come up throughout the conference this week is human behaviour, but also humans are at the heart of everything, and we haven't managed to get rid of them. AI is doing, I guess, a good job of trying to sideline them, but they're still there, and they can be annoying, they can be tricky, but they're still relevant, and they make important decisions that have an impact on cybersecurity. So we need to connect with them and get them to make good decisions. And one of the reasons that it can be difficult to get these humans interested in cybersecurity is how it is portrayed or how it comes across. And if you do a Google search on cybersecurity, it comes up a bit like this. If you look at the images, there's a lot of blue light, there's a lot of hexagons, there's a lot of locks. Pretty much it looks like a dark, scary sci-fi place, and the average person is thinking, crikey, that's not something I know anything about. At CERT New Zealand, we got a research agency to do some media analysis for us as well, which is looking at how journalists and media outlets look at cybersecurity. And they also came to the conclusion that cybersecurity is perceived as complex, shadowy and not for everyday people, with the kinds of attacks that are talked about feeling very scary, catastrophic, and requiring skills that the everyday person doesn't have. So this talk is really about how we can better connect with audiences where they are and get them to think about cybersecurity in a different way. And of course, as we all know, it's really important. So the New Zealand context is like everywhere else. Incidents are going up. These are the reports to us, just the tip of the iceberg really, and financial loss certainly going up. This is an interesting piece of research. So we asked people how impacted were you by so people who have been impacted by a cyber attack, could they rate them as severe or less severe? And the people that said that they were severely impacted or significantly impacted, they did sometimes list that losing money was part of that impact, but actually things like taking up their time or stressing them out were big parts of that. So I guess the message is that we can measure financial impact more easily, but really the huge impact of cyber attacks is on that loss of productivity and also the well-being of people who are, can take months to recover from this kind of thing. So knowing all that, and people are increasingly more exposed to cyber attacks, why aren't people taking defensive actions? The research that we have when we ask people, what are you doing, kind of comes up between about 50 and 60% of people are doing very basic things like using strong passwords, updating their software or browsers to the latest version, using two-factor authentication. So that's a lot of people that aren't doing the basics. Why don't people do these really simple things? Well, here's a scene from the movie. Here's Nick the vampire, who's only 3 months into being a vampire, and he's out on the town and he's telling everyone that he's a vampire. Now that's not in his best interest because there's vampire killers out there who could take him down. But despite that, he's inclined to want to tell everyone what he thinks is exciting news, that he's now a vampire. So vampires are weird, humans are weird. How do we understand them? Here's one model that has been talked about in some sessions this week. It's called the COM-B model and talks about capability, opportunity, and motivation. It's a really interesting model for understanding the full gamut of barriers that there might be to behaviour change. So capability is the area where it's about the know-how. Do I have the psychological capability? Do I have the physical capability to do this thing you're asking me to do? Opportunity is about can-do. Do I have the resources and time to do something, and does it fit with what my peers are doing? Is it culturally acceptable for me to do this thing? I think it's an area that's often overlooked. And motivation, do I want to do it? Have I planned to do it, or am I doing it in the moment as an instinctual thing? So that's a really interesting model, and I'd just again use, so we asked some people, we asked as part of a survey, why don't people take action? And of course people don't fully know why, but this gives us a pretty good indication. And these answers do fall within those 3 areas. So 58% said basically they had a problem with capability. So I don't know how to, or it's too complicated. So there's an information gap there. 57% said I keep forgetting to. So it's not top of mind. They're not being reminded to do this. And 48% said I don't want to, or I can't be bothered. So it feels like too much work, and it's work they can't be bothered doing. They don't want to do it. They can't see the point of doing it. So you can see how that COM-B model does fit with the reality of people and their reactions to cybersecurity actions. So just a few, again, gratuitous links to my movie. So here's some vampires out on the town, and they want to go into a nightclub to find some victims, but they've got some problems because I don't know if you knew this, but vampires have to be invited into a place. They can't just go in, and in this case they're asking the bouncer to invite them in, but the bouncer doesn't want to do that. So if you've ever run a cafe or a bar or something and wondered why you don't have vampires in your establishment, it could be because you haven't invited them in. So there's a capability issue there, and something to be aware of. Opportunity. So this is the vampires out on the town, and they meet some werewolves, and the werewolves are not their friends, and there's a bit of tension between the werewolves and the vampires, and the werewolves, some of them start using some bad language. And the leader of the werewolf pack says, this is not good enough. He says, remember who we are, werewolves, not swearwolves. So what he's appealing to there is the sense of peer pressure. Here we are, this is who we are as werewolves, and we don't do this kind of thing. And here's a situation in the flat where one of the vampires is not pulling his weight doing the dishes, and there's a big pile up of dishes for 5 years that haven't been done, all covered in blood, quite a scene. And there's the traditional wheel you have on the wall. If you've ever been in a flatting situation, it's the task wheel that you have to, tells you who's on dishes and who has to do the vacuuming. And Viago's asking why Deacon hasn't done the dishes, and because it's embarrassing. I invite people back to the flat and they have to see this pile of bloody dishes. And Deacon says, I don't know why you care, you're just going to kill them. So there's not really a real motivation there to do the dishes. So a few silly examples there. I thought it's a Friday, why not? But here's something a little bit more serious. Some erudite books about behaviour change, which do help us understand humans more easily. So the Nudge book, which you've probably heard about, is a way of putting that choice architecture in place so that people make decisions more readily. A famous example is about countries where they have organ donation as a default when you sign up for your driver's license. Rates of organ donation are hugely higher in those countries where that's a default rather than something where you have to opt in. And I was interested to see in the hotel where I think a few of us are staying, rather than housekeeping coming around every day, as is sometimes the case in a hotel, you have to opt in for housekeeping to turn up. And I'd be fascinated to see how if the housekeeping bill or cost has gone down dramatically for the hotel because people only have to opt in to do it, and they probably don't bother as much. Thinking Fast and Slow is a really important book by Daniel Kahneman, which talks about how humans have that system 1 or system 2 way of thinking. And this goes back to, I guess, cave person times when we had to make quick decisions. So basically, system 1, we make decisions really quickly based on our gut feeling and some learned heuristics or shortcuts that we've learned over time usually will serve us pretty well. Whereas the system 2 way of thinking is more laborious, and it takes a lot of logic for us to make those decisions. And as a few speakers have pointed out, cyber attackers are pretty onto this as well, and they will use those heuristics to get people to make quick decisions on clicking links or responding to fake phone calls, and that will make them fall prey to cyber attacks. But I guess what I'm interested in is how we can flip that around and use those techniques to actually encourage people to take defensive actions as well. So how would you use this information? Well, usually in the behavioural science area, you'll take quite a specific action that you're trying to achieve. Maybe it's something like when people get up from their workstation, you want them to lock it before they walk away. So thinking about where people are in the office, what exactly they have to do, and what might be the barriers to them doing that. And then you can think about the incentives that might make them want to take that action. Do they need a notice nearby to remind them? Or thinking about the peer pressure around them. If everyone else is doing it, will they do it as well? And then you can sort of theorise that, test it, and iterate that. That all might sound pretty complicated, but I have a bit of a solution for you. We've made a booklet, in fact, at CERT New Zealand, which you are welcome to download from our website, called Cyber Change. And we worked with a research agency to take well-known behavioural insights and apply them to the field of cybersecurity. And I'll run through some of those examples, and that's available on our website on the resources page there. So a few of the examples we have in this booklet. So overcoming ambiguity is one heuristic that can help humans make good decisions. So for example, if you want people to use a password manager for a lot of people that sounds like a very complicated thing to do. So making it more familiar could be creating a simple video that walks people through the process so that they can see that it's quite achievable. Framing is where something might be described as 60% fat-free rather than 40% full of fat. And it's the same information, but it's put a different way. And in this case, encouraging people to use long passwords often is quite off-putting. So one thing that we've tried is talking about passphrases. So putting together a phrase, maybe from a song or something like that, it's easier for people to remember. And when we've introduced people to this, they've been pretty interested in the idea and much more motivated. Chunking information, taking large bits of information, putting it into bite-sized pieces so that it's a lot more easy to digest and feels a lot more achievable for people. Fresh starts is a really interesting one. You probably know yourself at the beginning of the year, you feel motivated to declare that you will have an empty inbox, everything will be filed, your desk will be tidy. People are more open to new behaviour when at a new beginning. And indeed, we did ask people, what are the times when you're more likely to implement security measures? And 63% said setting up a new device. So that's an opportunity, something we are looking at exploring, working with partners perhaps when people buy a new device or a new computer. How can we perhaps provide some information to them at that point about implementing security behaviours when they're open to that change? And social norms is certainly very strong, that pressure to conform. It's sometimes easy to get this one wrong because, for example, if you had the situation where only a small number of people had implemented the latest software upgrade that you had recommended, it might be tempting to say, hey guys, only 20% of people have done the software upgrade, what's wrong with the rest of you? But then what the message you're sending is actually, for those who haven't done it, they're in the majority and they feel comfortable being in the majority. So if there's a way of flipping that sort of story around to perhaps say, we're really encouraged by the speed at which people are adopting this new software upgrade, that's great news. Implying that the majority is doing something is going to be much more powerful than trying to shame people for being part of a minority. Availability. People are more open to change when the main issue, I think it's supposed to be, is top of mind. So, so basically, this has come up a few times. Don't waste a good crisis. So if there has been something in the news about a cyber attack, it's a really great time to remind people to implement some security measures because they're much more likely to take that information on board. And indeed, some research that we did about people who had implemented a new online security behaviour in the past 6 months indicated that those who had experienced a cyber threat during that time were more likely to have implemented that behaviour than those who had not. And making it human. So we want to prime people to think that something we want them to do is something that people like them will do. And as I indicated earlier, cyber security at the moment doesn't feel that way. It feels dark and shadowy and complex. How do we make it human and easy and more empowering? I want to talk now a little bit about some campaigns that we've run at CERT New Zealand and just show how some of these principles have been used by us in the campaigns. So we run campaigns for individuals as well as for businesses. So just running through a few. This is the annual Cyber Smart Week that we take part in. There's a few countries that do something like this around the October time of year. So Cyber Up was the theme of one of our campaigns during that time, and this is an example of where we just make things really easy, keep it down to the basics and chunk things up into easy steps. And often IT or InfoSec people will come to us and say, why are you always talking about those same 4 steps? You know, don't you think it's time we moved on from those? And we say, well, actually, unfortunately, the research indicates that people still are not doing those things, so we really need to keep reinforcing the same basics. So these are really the 4 steps that we urge people to do, and we've been pretty consistent about that over time. This relatively complex diagram is some research that we've done to understand our demographics, and we've divided our population or our consumer groups into 5 different areas with different behaviours and different risk profiles. So I won't go through them in huge amount of detail, but what the message is from this one is that a group called at-risk regulars, you'll see the kind of red boxes there, that's where they're under-indexing on behaviours we want them to take. And so this is a group of people who are quite confident online, but they kind of think they know it all, and they're not actually doing a lot of the basics compared to the rest of the population. So they're an area, they're a group that we wanted to target, and they are aged between sort of probably mainly 20s to early 30s. And as you can imagine, they live in a world where there's a lot of advertising coming at them, a lot of online activity. How do we get that cut through to reach that group and make them take notice of something that possibly sounds a bit boring, like making a long password? So we worked with an agency to come up with Big Password Energy, which was a campaign we ran last year. And so introducing the idea that you might come up with some interesting phrases to make your password, which is something that engages young people a lot more than you think. We did actually have a few more risque phrases when we started, but when you work for government, you find that there's a few people who don't like that. We still got away with Beverly, which was good, but the rest of them, yeah, which is toned down. Another campaign we ran is aimed at businesses, small businesses, and it was 2 steps too easy. So really focusing on one simple action, because we know that businesses are really busy, and you know, it's usually a one-person outfit, and they're just doing everything. So trying to get them to do a whole lot of stuff is just, you know, forget about it. So put in place 2-factor authentication was the single message, and we used, I guess, that social norming thing, because we used actual case studies of businesses to talk about how they'd put in place 2-factor authentication. It was easy for them to do, and they feel a lot better about themselves because they're protecting the things that are important to them. So those are a couple of a few campaigns that we've run at CERT NZ. I just wanted to include another campaign because it's one of my favourites, and it's from Sweden. And it was based, it's a few years old, and maybe some of you are familiar with it already, but it was based on some understanding within Sweden that actually, as well as the usual 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, among the most common passwords in Sweden are some swear words. And that inspired the Swedish cybersecurity agency to come up with this campaign, which is genius because it's literally true, and it's also figuratively true. So they're a bit bolder than us. Here are some other examples of this campaign. So I can tell you that we would never get away with this in New Zealand, but I do applaud them for their braveness and creativity in coming up with these campaigns. And the great thing about this is obviously it gets enormous cut through because you're not going to walk past that without taking notice of something like that. So really fantastic. So in summary, talking about coming out of the shadows, it's so important in many ways that as cyber security professionals, people who understand the threat of cybersecurity, that you come forward in different ways. First of all, because the cyber threat is growing and you know what the threat is, you need to let people know that this is important and it's something they need to be taken seriously. But it's also about meeting humans where they are and recognising that humans are busy people and they have their quirks, and it's so understanding the human reality of our lives. But making cybersecurity part and parcel of our lives is so important because we're living our lives online now, and it really is what we need to do. So I guess I really hope that we have to keep reminding people that cybersecurity is serious and there's a threat, so we can't just make it all anodyne and boring, but hopefully we can kind of get a little bit away from hoodie guy and a little bit more in the reality of people's lives when we talk about what cybersecurity is and what they can do, and make it more doable for people and much more realistic that people can actually engage with this and make it something that they can employ in their everyday life. So hopefully you may have learned something today. Some key takeaways I suggest: humans are weirder than you think, but also a little bit predictable once you know some of the ways that humans are wired, and you can use that to your advantage. Cybersecurity experts, sorry to add something to your list of things to do, probably also need to understand how humans are as well in order to get that message across. And don't invite vampires into your house is another key takeaway. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane. It's really great. Some really classic examples of big password energy. There was a question actually from someone in the audience. They asked, do you also target awareness for different cultural groups?
Yes, great question. So that's something that we are looking at now, but our research indicates that there are some particular needs, and in fact we're in the process now of doing some videos particularly for the Pacific community within New Zealand, so in different languages. So that's something that we've got translated resources on our website, but we're also moving into how else we can turn that into videos and also get it out through different channels.
Excellent. Well, we got a gift for you here. I hope you can fit it back in your...
Wow.
Okay, everyone should actually check out the CERT NZ website. It's got some great breakdowns, like if you're an individual, if you're a business, if you're an IT specialist. So it's really clear, and the advice obviously applies to us, not just to people in New Zealand. So please thank Jane again.